The Mixolydian mode is one that is used widely in lots of different styles of music. Everything from pop to jazz and blues. Its distinctive major sound makes it very popular. It could also be described as mellow or relaxed. If you want to write a Mixolydian mode riff, then you need to understand the notes that go into the Mixolydian mode. The major scale is an excellent point of comparison for all other scales and modes. If I label the major scale, also known as the Ionian mode, with the scale degrees 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and 7, then the Mixolydian mode would have the scale degrees 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and flat or minus 7. When writing Mixolydian mode riffs, you want to try and highlight the notes that create a uniquely Mixolydian sound. In this case, it is very obvious which note this is. The only note of difference with the major scale is the flat or minus 7. Let's look at an example now to explore the mode further. G Mixolydian has the notes G, A, B, C, D, E and F. You saw that the flat 7 note is critical for the Mixolydian sound. The third note is also important because it indicates that this is a major sounding scale. A riff is a short, repeated, memorable musical phrase. Although strongly associated with rock music and the electric guitar, a riff can feature in any genre and be played on any instrument. The majority of riffs are between 1 and 4 bars in length. Any longer can sound like a melody or solo. All riffs are repeated. This is an essential part of the riff and how they hook themselves into the listener's mind. You could also call them a motif. That is, a musical idea that repeats. A riff can define a song. The first thing you hear in many songs is a riff, and they are the core part of many massive hits. Riffs are like a whole song, bundled up into a short, repeatable package. As such, they are comprised of 3 main parts: rhythm, harmony, and melody. I'll use the G Mixolydian mode now to demonstrate some different riff ideas. I'll present guitar tabs for the riffs. Remember that these ideas can apply to any instrument or MIDI. G Mixolydian is a guitar-friendly key. In standard tuning, you can play any of the open strings without being out of key. As such, it can open up all sorts of easy-to-play riff ideas. Almost anything can be a riff, but for ease I'm going to break them into a few categories here to help you think about different riff approaches. The sound or genre that you are aiming for may dictate the riff styles that you prefer. As always, trust your ear and go with it. Let's start with some interval-based riffs. An interval is simply the distance between 2 notes. Intervals are the building blocks of chords and scales. As such, they are a great point to construct a riff from. The bulk of guitar riffs are played on the lower 3 strings. The E, A and D strings have power and authority associated with bass notes, as the bass generally defines the harmony above it. Denser strings also produce more volume. Because of this, I'll focus on these lower registers in the examples. If you're working with a scale, such as G Mixolydian here, you can experiment by playing 2 notes in the scale that create an interval you like the sound of. Once you find the interval you like, then you can work on the rhythmic idea for your riff. For example, here is a simple riff using 2 notes in the G Mixolydian scale, F and G. This interval is a distance of 1 whole step or 2 semitones. This is known as a major second. I'll play the interval and then develop the rhythm of the riff. So much of the riff writing process is experimentation. Intervals can be played horizontally like you just saw. This is what you would find in a melody, or you can stack them vertically. That is when both notes are played at the same time. This is how chords are created. In the next example, I'll play notes from the G Mixolydian mode at the same time. Listen to how this changes the sound. Each interval will have an open E note in it. Repeating a note like this in a riff is known as a pedal note. I'll discuss this in more detail later. Look out again for the development of the rhythm in this example. You will have heard in the last example how important the rhythmic element was. The rhythm of a riff is what really makes it unique. A lot of riffs utilise syncopation to generate this rhythmic interest. This is where the weak beats in a bar are accented rather than the usual strong beats. For example, in 4/4 time signatures, there are 4 beats in a bar. Usually the strong beats are 1 and 3, and the weak beats 2 and 4. But if we turn this on its head, then you create a syncopated rhythm. And if you utilise notes that don't fall on any of these beats, then it will feel even more syncopated. You can put a rest and avoid notes where the strong beats fall to further create a syncopated feel. We've looked at some of the notes in G Mixolydian, but what creates the Mixolydian sound? At the beginning of the video, I showed you how the only point of difference between the major scale and the Mixolydian mode is the flat 7 note. So this note is critical to the relaxed Mixolydian sound. You also want to highlight that Mixolydian is a major sounding scale. This is heard through the use of the 3rd note. and also the root note of the scale so you know where the tonic or home is. Here's an example that highlights these notes: G, B and F. It starts with these 3 key notes with a hammer on from F to G as the high point. Then it descends and mixes in a few more notes from the scale. The root note G is the lowest in the riff to highlight its role as the tonic. Let's now talk about pedal note riffs. A pedal note is one that remains the same, usually low down in the arrangement, whilst other notes or chords change above it. This will usually use open E, A and D strings on the guitar. If the note doesn't sustain throughout the riff, it may also be referred to as a pedal point. It will often be the root note of the relevant scale that is repeated to really anchor the listener in the key of the song. But it doesn't have to be, so feel free to experiment. If you've heard heavy metal riffs with palm muted E strings throughout, they are an example of this. This might be one reason to try a drop tuning, like drop D, to get a suitable open note to pedal throughout your riff. You saw an example earlier that had a pedal note. Here's one in G Mixolydian that again uses the E open string, but also the F and G notes we want to target. Now it's time for a classic riff component, the power chord. A favourite of rock and metal, the power chord is a simple, powerful element in many iconic riffs. A power chord is actually just a perfect fifth interval, so it relates back to the first 2 examples in this video. Power chords are often used with pedal notes that we discussed previously. This is particularly prevalent in metal riffs. On guitar they are usually played as 2-note chords, with the 1st and 5th, or as a 3-note chord with the octave added above the 5th. If using a distorted guitar sound, you might also find other techniques used with power chords, such as palm muting and slides. A simple starting point for generating power chord riffs is to use the notes in the relevant scale for your song, and then using each note as a root note for a power chord. As with the other riffs, the rhythmic element is almost more important than the actual chords being played. Here's an example in G Mixolydian using power chords and other single note lines. The power chord riff leads us nicely into the full-blown chord riff. As the name suggests, this is simply combining full chords into a riff. This is where the lines between chord progression and riff can become blurred. But as discussed earlier, the riff will be shorter and more rhythmically driven than a chord progression. Chord-based riffs are easy to have a go at. Just pick 1 or more chords from a key and start experimenting with the rhythm. For example, here are the diatonic chords in the key of G Mixolydian. If you want to learn more about Mixolydian chords and progressions, there will be a link at the end of this video. A simple and popular chord progression uses the 1 chord G major, the 7 chord F major, and the 4 chord C major. Let's take these chords as the basis of our riff. You can use simple chords like this, but you're not limited. Different chord types can open up interesting sounds, and on the guitar they can be a simple addition or taking away of a finger. This can add rhythmic elements that help elevate us beyond the chord progression. In the next example, I explore this idea by using G dominant 7th and C add 11. The rhythmic variations are short enough to feel like a riff and not a progression. So far I've been using notes that are only in the Mixolydian mode, but riffs don't need to be boxed in like this. You can reach for any notes that you like the sound of. This introduces the idea of modal mixture or modal interchange. This is where you use notes from parallel scales within your riffs. Parallel scales have the same root note as the scale you are using. For example, we are using G Mixolydian here, so parallel scales would include G major, G Lydian, G harmonic minor, amongst others. A lot of riffs aren't considered in this level of detail and created more spontaneously. I'd recommend going for the spontaneous approach to begin with and just reach for notes and sounds that you like. The short nature of a riff won't usually undermine the tonal centre of your song. A riff can come into the songwriting process at different times. It could be that you create a great riff in isolation and this inspires you to write the rest of a song. Remember that they contain rhythm, melody and harmony. This song DNA can be unpicked from the riff and lead to quick songwriting. Concentrate on the notes that are emphasised or stand out. These will lead you to suggested chord changes. You could also take an existing chord progression and turn this into a riff. This might be by using chord notes or whole chords as we saw earlier. Or you could take a song melody and use it for your riff inspiration. This is particularly useful for finding rhythmic hooks for your riffs. Sometimes starting with some limitations can really help your riff writing process as it narrows down infinite possibilities to focus your attention. With that in mind, let's use the song I've written in other videos on the channel to help inform a riff. It's in the key of G Mixolydian and has a BPM of 142. It starts with an 8-bar intro, which I want to create a riff for. I've used mainly chord notes in the riff, with a few extra scale notes. The first 2 bars of the riff set up rhythmic patterns that repeat throughout. The first chord, G dominant 7th, is a G major chord with an F note added, so I begin the note with F and G notes. You can see that the chord changes just before the end of bar 1, and I reflect the chord changes by always changing notes in the riff as the chords change. The second bar uses arpeggios of the E minor and E flat major chords, and repeating the same rhythm but dropping 2 notes by half a step provides a nice flavour of the chords that play. Then the whole riff repeats, but the 4th bar changes the notes to reflect the C major and B flat major chords. The first 4 bars then repeat entirely, but the final few notes change to reflect the F major chord that the intro ends on. Have a listen to how the riff sounds, building up repetition, as well as the rest of the song. I hope this will inspire you to have a go at writing your own Mixolydian riffs. You've learnt about Mixolydian riffs, but there's a world of Mixolydian songwriting out there. I've made a Mixolydian playlist, which includes how I wrote the chords and melody in the final song here. Click that now to continue your Mixolydian journey.